a portion of all
This
of
is
our
great.
campus
It's gonna be
will
great.
This is so exciting.
public college campuses.
Ooh, are these waters for us?
And these waters are for us.
I love them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. All right.
Heck yeah.
We do what we can.
We are.
Because of the moderator. Absolutely, because of the moderator.
This is a combination of my blood-related family
Yes.
and also my queer family.
Oh, okay, I love it. I love it. I love it.
Hey, thank you.
I don't know if you heard,
And
this
remember,
is a combination of my
start
biological
thinking.
family and my queer family.
Yes, that's what I
Which is
heard.
very exciting.
I was not a
Good,
panelist
good,
at
good,
the
good, good.
Your fan club as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, ditto. if I was not a panelist, I'd be like, I love it.
I'd bring a son.
My daughter is very sad too. She doesn't often want to come with me for stuff like this, but
Oh, I wish you could.
oh, don't worry, she's living her best life. So
Oh, she's still doing that.
yeah.
Is it just been 1 year and I just lost track? Or was
No,
it
this is a
couple
different
years?
one.
I
This is the
remember-
fourth one. This was
The fourth? Oh.
She's in college. No, it's hard to keep up. It's like where's Waldo?
Honestly,
Yes.
We are.
Okay. No problem.
Conversation.
Indeed.
I think I have like part ADHD brain.
I mean, I feel like that's every conversation we've had. So I
know,
feel
like,
like, you know what? What you just said?
They were talking about the Hunger Games, and I had to sit in for Dr. Ford in the chairs meeting. They have this way they do budgeting that the chairs call it Hunger Games. Well, I went to the Hunger Games for the third time this year, and I was like, what are these? It's like everybody puts their baby and they get trained, and
Yeah.
someone else someone else. Oh, yeah. I mean, let's be clear, the dean doesn't call it the Hunger Games. Chairs call it the Hunger Games.
Good morning. Again, hi, it's still me, sorry. I am Dr. Alfred Day, as I mentioned, for those of you who were here for the last panel. Welcome to our second GeekEd panel of the day, as I said before. This is, we figured out this morning, our 15th GeekEd panel. And so we're happy to be here partnering with Comic-Con. And we're also happy to take gift cards, Amazon, whatever you got. I'm very excited for the panel we are about to embark on because there may be no more sad line in filmdom than Mr. Stark, I don't feel so good. Remember when that happened? Oh my God, that was just brutal. I was watching it in a movie theater in Santa Barbara when that movie came out, and I remember leaving that theater going, wait a minute, that's not how this is supposed to end. But I think it was a really important and really striking way to talk about trauma and to talk about sort of the things that human beings experience who aren't super. Who don't have magical spider powers, scientific spider powers is what's different. But I am, again, Dr. Alfred Day at University of California, Berkeley. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves from my left on, and introduce yourselves, tell us where you're here from, what institution you're representing, and what pop culture character springs to mind when we discuss the subject of trauma.
Okay, is this on? Do I have to, you can hear me, right? Okay, I'm Dr. Alison Cares. I am a sociology professor at the University of Central Florida, which is in Orlando. So we have some pop culture stuff in the area, of course. So actually we have been talking about that we just watched K-pop and
K-pop Demon Hunters.
K-pop Demon Hunters, yes. And so I think but I can't figure out which of the three heroines I would want to be, but definitely one of those three I think about a lot, and we've talked about them a lot as we got this panel ready too, as sort of different, well, it'll come up, but different ways that connects.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's still morning. My name's Emily. I use the She series. I'm a violence prevention education program coordinator at Cal. And I think a lot about 11 and her story of the various traumas that she's navigated, and kind of the ways that she's reacted to it and how people have helped support her through that, and how she's just an amazing, powerful person too. So yeah, we'll be talking a little bit about her today, but she comes to mind a lot.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jaylen Christie. I am blessed, honored, and stoked to be at my first ever Comic-Con. Really exciting. All right. I am the author and illustrator of Stink Bomb Man, The Brain Kids. I'm a budding sociologist learning from Dr. Alison Cares, pursuing a PhD in sociology at the University of Central Florida. And the superhero that comes to mind, the character that comes to mind, is Lightning from the series Black Lightning, who dealt with a very traumatic experience that we might dive into later. So yeah, very happy to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Sabrina Van Zuiden. My pronouns are she, hers, and I just finished my 2-year clinical fellowship at UC Berkeley's Counseling Center. Really excited to be here, and I came repping the most traumatized cartoon character I've ever seen, Steven Universe. Would love to talk a little bit more about his story later in the panel.
It is important for us to really dig down into the definitions of what we're talking about so that we're all sort of on the same page. So I'm curious from you all, how do you define trauma specifically in relation to the work that you do?
I can maybe start. I was thinking a lot about this question. I think that, so I come from the world of prevention. I actually worked a lot with Dr. Cares in sexual violence prevention at the Central Florida at the Victim Service Center. And what we would like to share a lot with our survivors was that trauma looks different for a lot of different people. We can't really define it what it is for someone else. But one thing that we talked about when I was going through my marriage and family therapy program was thinking as trauma as something that happens to someone that shouldn't have happened, first off, but also something that a person is navigating, and it's really hard for them to comprehend and sit with what has happened to them. And that can look really different for a lot of different people. An event for some person may not have been traumatic for them, but may have been for someone else. So I think that that's kind of where I would start with the definition, but would love to hear from the other panelists of how they would kind of add to it.
I agree with you, because trauma could be anything, really. It could be, for some individuals, it could be an act of violence, it could be sexual assault, it may be a natural disaster even, or maybe even just an accident. So it definitely comes in many different shapes, ways, and forms, for sure.
Yeah. I would say that there is the clinical diagnosable definition of trauma, and that would be, the response that somebody might have after an event like what you just described, Jaylen. But something that we've talked about in preparing for the panel is that we don't really have to limit ourselves to that clinical definition, right? Because of just the wide range of experiences that could induce that same biological process in a person of getting into that mode of survival, getting into that mode of dysregulation. And to me, trauma, sometimes colloquially it's referred to as the traumatic event, and that's the trauma. But like you said, someone could come out of this, two people could come out of the same event with different experiences. So I would say that trauma is really the person or the community's reaction to the event that was scary, was life-threatening, challenged their sense of safety.
And I think we also talked about that. I don't always like to use the big T trauma, which I think of as the clinical definition, which for if there's clinicians out there, right, there's ways that we measure that. But that doesn't mean that people that are subclinical are not still having experiences that are a part and shape their everyday lives, how they approach things and how they react to things. So, maybe if we're getting things covered for healthcare, it's helpful, but I think especially when we're talking about students and higher ed as a representative people in general, that really focusing on them And it may have been a big T trauma, or it may be subclinical, but it's still impacting them and how we work with them, because we all work with students in different ways.
One of the things as we prepared for this conference we talked a lot about was how storytelling and sort of dramatic narrative uses trauma as a dramatic tool to motivate characters to action. Batman wouldn't be Batman if his parents weren't killed in front of him when he was 8 years old. Canon, I can talk specifically about what happened to Batman at detail later, and just grab me and I'll buy me a coffee and I'll do that for you. But how does the use of trauma as a dramatic device impact our perception of trauma in the real world?
I could share something. So I think that trauma is very compelling on the screen in storytelling. It really is, it draws you in and you find what you can relate to. And something that always didn't sit quite right with me was just had created some dissonance in my mind was that the stories on screen resolve quite neatly because they need to, and the chronology or the timeliness of the trauma fits the narrative. And so often I think in our real lives our traumas don't really fit conveniently into a 90-minute movie. So I work with a lot of survivors of trauma, or a lot of people who, similar to Spider-Man, they're like, I don't feel so good and I don't know why. And it can't be that thing that happened to me because that was like 4 weeks ago. There's no way that I was fine after it, so there's no way that is what's happening for me. And it's like, well, actually our bodies take time, and you might not see the impact of a traumatic event in your body, in your life, until 6 months, years afterwards. That's what stands out to me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because we think a little bit about like the hero's journey in narrative storytelling, and that might not necessarily be what the healer's journey is going to look like. When we worked in the Victim Service Center, we talked a lot about how healing is not linear. When I was doing my clinical internship at Cal, I did have students kind of come up to me, and when we were working together in our space, having this expectation of I should be over this, and then there's like we're working together, we have these goals, or we're meeting those goals, and then something happens, or they feel like they've regressed. And when we see these different narratives where it's like tied neatly in a bow, like you mentioned, Sabrina, it can feel really discouraging of what's wrong with me, I should be over this by now. And so when we actually are seeing now what I love about pop culture is I think that we're getting to a space where we're becoming more trauma literate, where we have longer series, where we can see on the screen different folks who are kind of going through that healing journey, and it's not necessarily linear because we can expand a little bit more. So when we see things like Stranger Things and Eleven is navigating moments where she is triggered, and we can really see what that could look like for someone, I assume that other folks can feel a little seen in that moment. But especially working with Cal students who have a lot of high expectations of performance, who are also kind of taught to, you have to go through this to earn it, and you have to earn your place and earn your degree in this way. There's a lot of pressure of being, okay, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think one of the downsides, at least traditionally, of the trauma narratives, besides them being linear, is they also are very similar. And in fact, even if people shared what we would objectively say is a very similar trauma, their reactions can be entirely different.
Right.
And so that can be hard, where actually you are being affected by whatever the experience you had, but it did not look like it looked in what, it doesn't look like what 11's looked like, or it doesn't look like someone else's. I do think our students are much more trauma and stress literate, at least than we were when I got the chance to go to college. But the danger is there's pop psychology, right? So they're self-diagnosing, they're saying something is traumatic, and I'm not saying they aren't affected by that thing that happened, but that's one time where I do talk about I think more about that big T trauma, because, really not getting along with your roommate is difficult. And it is really difficult. I don't know if any of you also have had a horrible roommate. but
I've actually been a horrible roommate. So.
yeah, maybe I was the horrible roommate. This goes back to the last panel in the Heroes and Villains and the Mirror, right? I'm sure she thought I was the villain. But, and that is a stressful thing, and that is absolutely something we should work with students on, but that's really different than something that is going to live in your physical body and some of the other stuff.
And I just want to piggyback off of something that Sabrina said that I truly 100% agree with. Sometimes when it comes to superhero narratives, especially in television and in movies, when there are storylines that deal specifically with trauma, they do have a tendency to be wrapped up in a nice bow. And I know that coming from, well, speaking for myself, you know, in the Black community, at least the community in which I'm from, Orlando, Florida, trauma is not something that we typically discuss, all right? When you talk about trauma, 9 times out of 10, your parents are going to tell you all you need is Jesus and a bottle of Crown Royal, and your problems will be fixed, all right?
Wait, is that Florida? Because that seems, I'm in California.
It's universal, I guess, I suppose. I mentioned the character Lightning earlier. So there was a TV show, Black Lightning is one of my favorite superheroes, created by Tony Isabella with DC Comics. There was a 4-season series that ran on the CW a few years ago starring Cress Williams as Black Lightning. One of his daughters, Jennifer, whose code name is Lightning, she dealt with a lot of trauma, and instead of them wrapping it up within, 45 minutes, which is like a typical, runtime for a show, they gave her the whole entire season to deal with it, and we were exposed to that as audience members to see her cope with it, get with a therapist, and work through that. And some of that carried over into the 3rd season as well. So it was phenomenal being, a Black man watching that and seeing, okay, if I go through something, I don't necessarily have to sweep it under the rug. Like, I can sit in this and navigate that. So that was phenomenal.
Actually, that reminds, I think also we have these ideas, and this is also because you have to wrap it up in a bow that, like, there's the trauma, and then there's the working through it. But for example, like when we talk about the Black community, when we talk about some other communities, when we talk about refugee communities, the traumatic thing is not over.
Right.
Right, and so I think that's one of the other things that's a real differentiator, is that there are certainly traumas that it was a traumatic event, and then there's the moving through, but there are so many things that are ongoing, sort of swimming in the soup of something that is traumatizing or really damaging, and that I think movies are, and themes are getting better at dealing with that, but that does not fit. You need a season.
Right.
You need a whole series.
Right.
You don't need a 90-minute movie or a one book.
And I'm curious from that, what are some more accurate depictions of trauma? You've already talked about Lightning and Black Lightning. I'm so glad you name-checked the creator. Also, Trevor Von Eaton was also co-creator, was the artist, and a Black man, one of the few Black men working for DC Comics in the 70s. Sorry, just nerded out for a second.
No worries, no worries.
But we're at Comic-Con, so I get to do that. What are some more examples of trauma that seem more tied to the real experience of human beings and trauma that you've all seen in media and pop culture?
I am so glad you asked.
We didn't plan that question.
So if anyone's seen Steven Universe, yes. Okay, perfect. So what I think I really resonated with in Steven Universe was something that I saw a lot on the college campus that I was a therapist at, which was Berkeley. So Steven just spends his young life striving so hard to live up to what he thinks is expected of him, and he is fighting aliens. His body is taking trauma. He's dealing with identity crises, not sure where he fits in, and he's excellent, right? He is constantly coming out ahead. He's constantly figuring it out. He is a child, but he is the adult in so many ways, making all these decisions and leading a group of actual adults. And then when we see the second part of the series, Steven Universe Future, we fast forward and he's an adult. Not an adult, sorry, he's like a mid-teenager. He's like 16. And he's coming apart physically and mentally, and he can't figure out why. And he goes to a doctor, and the doctor's like, every bone in your body has been broken like multiple times. What's going on? And he's like, oh, well, maybe all of that crime fighting or like all of the hits that I took when I was younger actually did impact me in some way. And it shows up like he has these insecure attachments with his friends. He feels really insecure about himself. He feels like latches on to people and is like, please don't ever leave me. And I saw that a lot in myself, but also within, you know, like the folks that I was counseling, the students I was counseling, of just like, I got to this campus by pushing myself to the millionth percent that I could, and that was motivated, like, I have it on me to do this for my family. I have this expectation, whether the family actually put it on me or not, I have this expectation of myself. I need to do everything to the nth degree, and I did that all the way throughout high school now, and the only goal was to get to college. Now I'm here, and I'm malfunctioning. I can't get out of bed. I can't go to those lectures I'm paying so much to go to. I can't pay my bills because I can't make it to a work shift. I can't turn in my assignments, and they come to the counseling center. I'm so glad they do, because not everyone does, and they're like, what is wrong with me? And it's like, it's not what's wrong with you. What happened? What happened to you? And so I really appreciate that Steven Universe, both professionally and personally, gave me that portrayal.
I love Steven Universe, and I love that you brought that up, because that scene too in Steven Universe Future, where he is embodied this representation of how he is viewing himself, which he calls himself a monster, which is just so heartbreaking. And then his really close friend, Connie, says, you know, Steven has been for like here for us. This whole time we need to be there for him. So I think a lot about how the whole community in that moment like ran towards Steven and held him, and it makes me like want to cry in this moment. But I think a lot about how like the university and how these different systems, how can we hold people who are at these moments seeing themselves in this way of what is wrong with me, I'm a monster. And then thinking from a prevention standpoint as well, how do we kind of catch that before that moment where Steven is really feeling like falling apart? So I think that Steven Universe also does a great job of showing what healing can look like, especially from a community standpoint, and how we can all come together and hold quite literally someone in that moment, but also figuratively too. Other depictions that I find that are pretty like helpful for showing like the diversity of experience too is, I think a lot about Ms. Marvel and thinking about intergenerational trauma and how the partition and learning about her family history. And then going back to Stranger Things, there's this moment too in the first season, I think like the second episode, 11, is found by Mike and his friends, and she has gone through a lot of trauma that we don't really know about yet. But there's this moment where he's kind of giving her new clothes because it was rainy outside, and she goes to change, and he's trying to give her privacy. There's obviously some social norms that she's not really knowing about, and he goes to shut the door, and she asks, make sure that the door isn't closed. And in that moment, he's like, oh, it seems like this isn't something that you're comfortable with, right? This is a trigger. And so he kind of negotiates and keeps it a little open for her. So I think that's an accurate depiction too of, you don't need to have superpowers to be really helpful for someone who has gone through such a traumatic experience. And you also don't need to understand or know the story of the trauma in order to support someone too. So I always think about Stranger Things and that really particular moment and how to support.
One of the things we talked about in the lead up to this panel was really thinking critically about how university and institutional systems intersect with students who have experienced trauma. And I'm wondering if anybody wants to talk a little bit about that. So we talked about sort of how it intersects in admissions and sort of other institutions that the university has. Can anybody sort of just talk about how the university intersects with student trauma?
That's such a nice way to put it. So I'm on the faculty side, but in my research, one of the things is I really do a lot about gender-based violence and victimization, particularly on college campuses, because college campuses are my community. I always start my semester, I actually have a little magic wand from, I don't know, one of my kids' birthday parties that I will often bring in to say that, if I could, I would like to have a magic wand that just put a bubble right, over students so that they could do college the way it's conceived of, right? That you can just totally be into it and you don't have to work and nothing bad happens to you and you're not impacted by stuff. But obviously my magic wand does not work. Lots of things happen. But I think what's hard is that big T trauma thing is the piece that comes in, because many of our policies are very medically and clinically based on college campuses, and this is not the fault of people like Sabrina, who does the good work and gets it, right? And actually, I rarely work with people on campuses and student affairs that don't get it. But many of our policies are very medicalized, right? The vast majority of our students are 18 to 24. That's also when the vast majority of diagnosable mental health disorders onset, right? But for many of these, you know, like you can't have a medical withdrawal or you can't have these accommodations until you have a diagnosis, right? Which costs money to get, which many people don't have. There are communities and families in which it is stigmatized and, you know, like I've had students before that like their depression wasn't bad enough for them to get a withdrawal, or we are at our institution, and this is not picking on them, it's been this way at almost all the institutions I've been at. Many times medical withdrawals, you have to withdraw from all the classes, right? Whereas if they could withdraw from like 2 of their 5 classes, they could probably actually handle the other 3. And so I think there's a real disconnect. It's kind of like the movies. It's an all or nothing thing, right? Trauma is an all or nothing thing, and it's bad enough that we can help you, or it's not bad enough that we can help you and you can soldier on.
Yeah, something else that I'm thinking about is, I think you're exactly right, Allison, right? I've worked with many students where it's like, how do I play the game of this university to get you the care that I know you need? And I'm thinking about, you know, from the very beginning, what do we ask students to do to get on that campus first? What did they have to sacrifice to be able to have that competitive application? What essay question did they have to write? How did they answer that, you know, almost universalized question of, tell us about a time you overcame adversity? And even at that age where, you know, not everyone, but a lot of people are at that age of 17 writing that essay, and the expectation is before you come to this campus, I want you to have resolved whatever adversity you were subjected to or whatever you overcame. And for some people, that might be a big T trauma. For some people, maybe it wasn't, but either way, it's kind of put this on a platter for us and make it quick, make it a good soundbite, and make sure that you have it resolved, because we also don't really want to handle the messiness of it. And you know, something else that I was thinking about a lot in the panel before us, we talked a lot about the role of grant funding and funding in higher education. And I can't tell you how many students came to my therapy office because they couldn't pay rent. And it was just what does that do to the nervous system when you have left, for some people, you've left your stable environment for the first time to venture off somewhere, especially at a brand name school. It's like, I'm supposed to get here because that's where the dream happens. That's where the magic happens. Suddenly, you know, everything will go perfectly in my favor once I get to this dream school. And the reality is rent is due. Bay Area rent is no joke. And on top of that, how do I feed myself? I give people lists of where they can find free pizza luncheons on campus, because that actually makes a difference of whether they're going to eat that day or not. I know plenty of students who are couch surfing or living out of their car, and and I will say, you know, the university that I worked at, they do have really amazing resources. There's a level of social capital and bandwidth that you need to go access that resource, especially when you have to wait in the longest line and you only have that 1 hour in between your 2 classes and your discussion section, and then you have to run to work right after. And then when are you gonna write that essay that's due, by the way?
Right.
And then it just gets away from you. So I had a point in there somewhere, I'm sure, but.
It was great, you did good.
No, it made me think a little bit about how, like, we're talking about like how narratives are like reflecting like the human experience, but I think a lot about how we may have a narrative of what a college student's experience looks like, and then when in reality, when they're in your therapy office or you're working with them in your class, and it's like, yeah, the reality is a lot of students, and I have student employees are working, are navigating a lot of different things, or are navigating a lot of traumas on top of that, and then are going through a very transformative time in their lives too. That's both exciting and really stressful and hard to navigate. And how can we be better trauma informed in that way, and understanding that the diversity of the experience of the university, that having things due at 11:59 p.m. isn't really realistic for some students, or adding a quiz in the middle of the day, like things like that, you know, there are students that are working, who are parents, who are navigating all these different things, that are living out of their cars that we may not have realized until they're, you know, sharing their stories and their narratives with us too.
Although I'll say, and I'm rarely the positive person, there has been quite a bit of movement in the last 5 to 10 years on things like universal design and trauma-informed campuses, that there's some really important work. And so I think we're making some real progress in, I don't want to say normalizing trauma, but sometimes, yes, that's not making it okay, right? But having the kinds of policies that students don't have to do what we call the trauma dance, right, to get an extension on a paper. And things that can help normalize that difficult things are going to happen, and we've got that built in. So one of my research projects is actually called Life Happens, because we're trying to figure out for students, like, what are the life things that are happening to them? How are they navigating this? What do they need? How do they cope? And the answer is, and I'm a researcher, they answer a bunch of questions, but 93 to 97% of them in all of our studies have something that could actually qualify as a potentially traumatic event in their life. So this is really all of them, like, if you think about it. So if we come from that and we realize, okay, there are ways I can set up my syllabus as a professor. There are ways that I can talk the first day. There are ways, because many people don't, as Sabrina was saying, have the cultural capital to navigate, even when, because all of our campuses here had really amazing things for students to support them. Okay, but like, is it in the syllabus? Do I have it on a quiz that they have to do a financial aid activity at most universities the first week? Do I have stuff in there that is like a scavenger hunt where they figure out where stuff on campus is to get their thing? So there are, and that's not calling anybody out either, if that makes sense. So, and there's a lot of really good work on how we can switch our policies to be, I don't want to say exclusive, but to do a better job welcoming everybody in the diversity of ways that they've experienced trauma and react to it.
One of the things that we've talked a lot about in the lead up to this is a lot of the stories, particularly superhero narratives, place trauma as sort of a necessary prerequisite to heroism, right? Batman and Spider-Man had murdered parents or caregivers. Superman comes from a genocide. The X-Men, face against a world that hates them. How does this reflect true human beings? Is trauma necessary for growth, or is this a trope that we find in storytelling narratives or heroic narratives?
So I don't think that trauma is necessary for growth, but to your point, it does seem like the vast majority of these superpowered characters have something traumatic happen to them, and then they're inspired to become a superhero. Like, it's usually used as motivation or as a backstory, and then sometimes even as a plot device, which is, I don't know how I feel about that necessarily. We can talk about that maybe if we have time, but I don't think that trauma has to necessarily be something that you go through in order to grow. If it happens, it happens, but I don't think it's needed for growth.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's important to recognize that there can be post-traumatic growth and like healing from it, and at the same time, it is not necessary. And I feel like there is kind of this narrative that can happen on college campuses of needing to be resilient and needing to have gumption in order to suffer now and then you'll have great rewards later. And I think that that puts a lot of pressure on students, and then navigating that, especially feeling like I don't deserve this support system that is in place for people who are going through different and navigating different challenges. I should be okay because that's actually part of the experience. I had a lot of students who said that it wasn't that mental health wasn't talked about at Cal, it was just that it was normal to be anxious and normal to be depressed, to the point where I don't deserve to go to mental health services because everyone is going through it. So that was an interesting challenge of navigating that with students, of maybe it is a common occurrence, it shouldn't be. It's a common occurrence and you still deserve support. I don't know if you had something similar, Sabrina, with students that you worked with.
Yeah, I have, but what I want to talk about is what you brought up earlier, Emily, where Mike had that moment with 11 in Stranger Things. Mike has had I mean, his town's weird, but he's had a pretty good life up until that point.
Yeah.
And what it took was compassion for the person in front of him to have that moment of growth. And when I think of, again, you know, we don't need to like stay too long in the world of clinical diagnoses, but part of the clinical diagnosis of PTSD is you could have experienced that traumatic event yourself, or someone you cared about. You could have witnessed it, or you could have cared for someone who went through that. And right now, I think a lot of us, we talked about the importance of social media in the last panel. A lot of us have access to really detailed depictions of violence and an ongoing genocide through our phones right now. And so I don't think that, if the question is like, do you have to experience like an event that caused trauma in you to have growth? No, I don't think so. I think if you are a person who could be sensitive to another human, you have that capacity to grow into compassion. And I think that that is a really important thing for us to lean into right now. Just like, how do I stay compassionate in a world where it's very inconvenient to feel sensitive? It is very inconvenient to be dysregulated by the news I see on my phone when I have a job to do, or my students have assignments to complete. And so I think a lot about how people say often, like, I'm a pretty open book. I often share about myself. I often share if I'm having a bad day, and people will tell me, you are so brave for being so transparent. And I appreciate it, but I don't know if it's brave, but I think or they'll say like, thank you for being vulnerable. And it's like, I appreciate your intent behind that. And what if we recognize vulnerability as strength rather than opening ourselves up to weakness? Because it takes a lot of strength to be vulnerable and transparent about the pain we're going through, either what we've actually experienced individually ourselves or what we see in our community happening. And again, I'm sure there was a point I was getting to.
It was there. You did good.
You're hitting all the points.
And I think we've individualized this so much, and I am from the US context, so I cannot speak to other cultural contexts, right? But we have a very individualistic society, and so we talk about resilience and we talk about going to therapy and all these, but this does not indict the system that continues to create trauma for people, right? Like, these traumas are shared either vicariously because we're scrolling or whatever, but you know, a lot of these things are problems that we could solve, right? So I spent a lot of decades really saying that, like, it would be super nice if people who are supposed to love each other don't hurt each other, right? Like, I'd really like there not to be intimate partner bonds. I'd really like there not to be sexual assault, because we have great people like Emilie and Sabrina and others doing great individual work. We have lots of folks who've been superheroes, right, in their lives, surviving trauma or helping others. But we're just perpetuating the whole thing because we haven't changed the sort of structure that keeps on doing that, right? That gets the pressure on the kids in the brand name colleges. That is not, in my opinion, healthy, right? So you all can treat it, but we're going to be treating forever.
Yeah.
There's many types of trauma that we experience, and some of it might be related to sort of salient identities that we hold. For example, I was really heavily impacted by the death of George Floyd, and particularly by the video of it being sort of shown over and over, in part because my identity, I'm a black man, and so that really resonates for me. I'm curious about the connection between identity-based trauma and sort of what we see in these narratives. For example, you talked a little bit about Black Lightning and how important it is to see a black family being supportive of therapy, which is not impossible, but is definitely a shift culturally from my own experience. Others' experience may be different. So I'm curious about not only identity-based trauma, but how we see it in narratives and how narratives can help or harm those processes.
Well, I know when the events of I know back in 2020, with everything that happened with George Floyd, I know when that happened, I actually called out of work because it was just too much for me to comprehend. And my boss actually ended up fighting with the powers that be, because we had a parent company. And my boss was gracious enough to fight for me to, have me take that time off, to decompress. But I think for me, growing up, the main form of literature that I, ingested was comic books. So seeing the, Jennifer, aka Lightning story in Black Lightning, that was refreshing to me. Or even watching the new Disney Plus series Ironheart and how she's coping with the loss of her best friend, and seeing that depicted has helped me, work through some of the things that I've been through. Last year, my aunt passed away. That was traumatic, and my professor worked with me and was able to rearrange my schedule and push some of my assignments back, which is great. And then when I was earning my master's degree, a very good friend of mine, Justin, died in a motorcycle accident, which was very traumatic. And I was also blessed to have a professor that rearranged some things for me and accommodated me to work through that. But I think for me specifically, seeing some of these depictions as related to superheroes and seeing how they cope with it, and then seeing, sometimes it's like, okay, if they were able to get through that, that's reassuring, because maybe I can get through this as well, or seeing the different ways in which they've been able to navigate that or handle that. It's been inspiring to me, so it's helped me to work through some of the things that I've experienced and gone through, for sure.
Thanks for sharing that, Jaylen. It's making me think a little bit about what has inspired me, which is there's this plot that happens. Sorry, I'm talking about Stranger Things so much, but
It's a good show. It's a good show.
Good show. Yeah.
I think this is the place to do it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's a good point. So Nancy, she's navigating sexual harassment at her place of work, at her first position as an intern, and Jonathan is interning with her, and he has a different identity as her, and he's, saying like, don't, speak up, this is really important for us. He also has low SES too, so he's navigating that identity too of keeping a position is important for him, but she is navigating a world a little differently than him, and as someone who has also like navigated sexual harassment at the workplace previously, and seeing her in this really wonderful moment with her mom was just really heartwarming of, hey, you tried to do something and, like finish the story is kind of how she shared it. But it was just like wonderful to see women supporting women in that moment. And it was really inspiring to see how someone really stood up and reached out for support in that moment. It was just really an amazing scene for me, I think.
I am a strong believer that representation matters. I've really benefited from watching shows and movies with characters that looked like me, showed people like me being strong, queer narratives. I've benefited a lot from that. And something that I'm so interested in is when media shows what could be instead of what the world that at least I experience currently is like. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if anyone's seen Schitt's Creek, there's an episode where a gay character, Patrick, comes out to his family, and they don't act homophobically. They act immediately. They are like, I'm so sorry that we weren't people that you felt you could tell that to. It wasn't a moment of like, how could you be this way?
Yeah.
And so just to have, like, I think these mediums are so powerful to, like, not only describe and show the world as it is or as we may, like the harm we may have experienced, but there's so much power in being able to show what we could work towards, right? What it could look like if people supported each other in the workplace, if people were proactive about preventing violence, if people were proactive about leaning into community. And I think that's, like, my favorite brand of media, I think, is like cozy children's media meant for the sensitive queer adult. I think that's like my exact brand of what I like.
My favorite genre.
That's my favorite thing to watch. So, you know, like Steven Universe, She-Ra, all these things where they have, it's not just being able to like see and reckon with my trauma through the stories, but also see and reckon with what could the world be if I acted more like that character, if I expected these things out of the people in my life and lived up to that myself.
It's like so heartwarming and heartstopper to see such a wonderful like community of queer folks just like supporting each other through, I think they're in high school or middle school, but yeah, I love that show. So shout out to Heartstopper.
Well, and I think when it's mainstream, even though, you know, we have lots of different media we can choose, that also says something to people. It's not just that you found one other person, it's that somebody is making money, which is a valued thing
Yes.
in our society, with that message with somebody that looks like you or shares an identity with you. So I think the diversification of this, of who's experiencing trauma, how they experience trauma, in pop culture it has been helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that you brought in like the back end of it. It's not just the content, but the fact that the studio behind it felt that this was worth standing behind. Like, I remember watching Korra, Legend of Korra, when I was younger. I did not catch the queer undertones until I rewatched it when I was older and was like, oh. And now I can turn on Steven Universe or, you know, any other show and see that representation just unabashedly, just like, we're here and the studio feels comfortable putting this out. And, you know, we're talking, the last panel is talking about like this rollback on how DEI is seen in the public eye, maybe like what we thought was like this thing that I still stand behind, but is now catching some bad publicity as maybe it's not 100% go ahead for some people. I think that that's what I struggle with accepting that maybe we'll lose access to stories that can unabashedly proclaim messages that I feel good about, that have helped me feel good.
Yeah, although I will say, you know, money can talk, and, you know, Spider-Man's not always white anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
And all kinds of people go and see it. So I try to, you know, hold on to those things too, because, you know, I think Black Panther would not have been, I'm a child of the 70s, and for that to be such a big hit.
Over $1 billion.
Yeah, I mean, no studio would have made it that way, and it wouldn't have played that way, and it would have been a very different audience. So, you know, we come a little way.
And I will say one of my own particular research interests is parasocial relationships. And my research was on how people use parasocial relationships during COVID to cope. And one of the most interesting things I found was the number of my interview subjects who identified as women who just Leslie Knope, and they would just watch Parks and Rec on an almost constant loop, and that's how it was like I used a phrase in my research, the parasocial colleague. She became a parasocial colleague for people when they were isolated and didn't have access to actual colleagues. And so I thought that was just really remarkable, how much it mattered to people who described other circumstances in their life that were pretty awful. One of the things I think we forget about the what I call the Great Distress era is, and I think this is a societal trauma response, we sort of have collectively stopped talking about how many people died.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people were saying, yeah, I lost both grandparents within 2 weeks of each other, and you know, coincidentally, I really engaged in parasocial relationships. And so I thought that was just tremendous. We have about 3 minutes left, so I think maybe I have time for one question. Yes?
Yeah. That's a great question. So for those who didn't hear, it was when people write their college admissions essays and they're asked to share, you know, a story of overcoming adversity, how do admissions offices receive that? Do they receive it positively, negatively? And I'll be honest, I only have engaged in that process personally as the student, working as a therapist in a counseling center. But I'm wondering if anyone else.
I've had some experience in talking with admissions colleagues. One of my areas of responsibility is student crisis. And so if someone writes something in their admissions essay that alarms folks, that they might come to me and say, hey, how do we manage this? And it's interesting, and this is, I think, ties in with what the topic is that in my experience, anecdotally, there's a point in which it's just seen as a very good thing. The student had something that they overcame, and that makes them an interesting student and valuable to come to the university. But then there's a point which, if it's not 100% resolved, we're now, well, do we want to take this risk? But depending on the nature of what was disclosed, we may not, there may be an ADA violation by not, so it gets very complicated very quickly. And I think that the underlying sort of thing that we have to deal with is, have we created a system that encourages students to disclose trauma in order to gain access to higher education, right? And that, if, you know, it's a thread that if we start to pull on it, it gets very problematic very quickly. And it's just something that we thought it was important for us, all of us in higher education, to really think deeply about is, are we requiring students not only to disclose their drama, but to disclose it in a way that fits within a contained message that's just, okay, exactly. You know, this is, it's a trauma, but it stopped, and this is how it's resolved. That's our time. I do want to leave with one quote. And this is a quote from Christopher Reeve, and about how he thought about the definition of a hero. And this was a quote from after his accident in which he was paralyzed. And he basically says, before, he thought a hero was defined as a person who does good deeds. But after his accident, he said, and I quote, "A hero is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles." So that's our time. Thank you so much for joining us. Can we get a picture real quick?
Yeah. Do we get up, or you want us to sit?
Sit or standing?